Arpita ji, you are on mute. Yeah, please start.
Abhinandan, Abhar, Namaskar, and a very good evening to all. This is Arpita Srivastav Rai, welcoming you all to this teaming tournament on public policy under Srijan Social Internship Program organized by Atmanirbhar Bharat Vocational Learning in collaboration with Deep Welfare Organization and Mindcube Multi-Services Private Limited. Well, today the highlights of the session are, in the first session, today we are having one of the very resourceful person who's going to mentor all our interns on the Open Digital Currency Bill. Glad to have Dr. Anil Kumar Yadav with us. And the second session will be mentored by the convener of the Atmanirbhar Bharat, Mr. Pradeep Singh, on the policy framework. So here, starting with the first session, well, we are very glad to have Dr. Anil Kumar Yadav with us on the board of the ANB. And before I invite him to address our students, I would love to give a brief introduction about him. Allow me to give your introduction, sir.
Yeah,
Dr.
good evening, everybody.
Dr. Anil Kumar Yadav currently working as General Manager, Reserve Bank of India, Chandigarh. Qualified in UGC NET examination in 8 different subjects. Those are economics, management, commerce, HRM, labor welfare, psychology, political science and public administration, and journalism and mass communication. He's also a holder of the Limca Book of Records in 2016 and 2020, and also Golden Book of World Record in India. He also holds a bank of records for maximum numbers of post-graduation degrees from most number of universities in India, 24 postgraduate degrees from 15 different universities in India, and also arrives on 12 state and UT and has 3 graduate degrees. Asian Books of Records for having maximum numbers of banking certifications from Indian Institute of Banking and Finance. Till date, 41 certifications from IIPF. So here's the short introduction of him. Now I would like to invite Dr. Anil Kumar Yadav on the board of the ANB. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Arpita ma'am, as well as all the faculty members and the interns who are joining this virtual session on a very new and very interesting topic. In fact, as we all know, the things which are going to happen in near future is basically the digital world and the traditional currency which we are having. For example, coins, notes, and digital mode of payments, they are going to be, in fact, taken over by a new form of transaction mode, which we all know is going to be, we can call it as official digital currency or cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or whatever. There are various names to this particular coin. Now, before I take upon this, because the topic which I've chosen for the interns today is basically not yet crystallized in the form of an act. It is still a draft bill which was framed in 2019, and the government proposes to again reintroduce this bill, which is called as banning of cryptocurrency and regulation of official digital currency bill 2021. So as the Honorable Finance Minister Madam in February announced that a lot of discussions have been going on between various stakeholders such as the Reserve Bank of India, Government of India, and also the other players who are there in the cryptocurrency market. So let's see how this bill in fact comes out, and what would be the future course of usage of this official digital currency, which is in fact having a lot of opposition from various quarters in the economy. But as we all know, Bitcoin and other forms of cryptocurrencies are in vogue even in India. Before I move on to my presentation, a few very interesting facts which I would like to just share with the participants here today. First is that what is the volume of transactions which takes place in this particular Bitcoins and the cryptocurrency sphere. Now, if you look at the data which is there in various sources, now the number of crypto startups in India is 340, which is a huge number. So 340 crypto startups are there in India, which in going forward, we also presume that they would be in fact again increasing in numbers, and when the regulation starts, or when the bill which is being proposed in the parliament in the monsoon session, if it takes shape in, and if it is in the advantage, if it is in advantage of the crypto players, then I think the startups will really go up. Now, when we talk about the daily crypto trading volume in India, that is very, very huge. It's between 400 to 500 million dollars. So if you look at the valuation of this particular crypto trading which is happening in India, it's really, really massive. And if you look as on June 21st, 2021, almost a month back, the price of one Bitcoin was rupees 25.47 lakh. So this is a valuation which in fact in the normal traditional form of transactions which we have is very, very huge. Now, the market cap of global crypto industry as on June 21st, 2021 is again $1.33 trillion as per the coin market cap source, which in fact collects the data all over the globe, and then in fact releases some figures on a monthly and a weekly basis. So the market capitalization of the global trade is really very, very huge, $1.33 trillion. Now, coming to, I hope many of the, is this particular session interactive, or how do you take questions? Well, when we finish the session, we take the questions, or if anybody has a doubt in between, they can ask questions. How is it?
Usually we are going after the presentation, but if someone is having a doubt in the session also, they can unmute or they can give us on the chat box.
Thank you so much. Now, I think you must have read, some of you must be knowing, when did this particular Bitcoin transaction or commercial transaction take place in the world first time? Now, it was on May 22nd, 2010, that is almost 11 years back. Laszlo Hanezek, a Florida-based programmer, made the world's first commercial transaction using Bitcoins. Now, he bought 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins. Now, at today's prices of 10,000 Bitcoins, it would be around $357 million. And if you go by that particular price, it will be the world's most expensive food order ever. Now, a month ago, that was in the month of June, when Bitcoin was at its peak, the 2 pizzas would have been valued at $600 million. And cryptocurrency enthusiasts celebrate May 22nd as the Bitcoin Pizza Day. Now, this is just a brief background about the amount of money which is there, the amount of transactions which are taking place in this particular sphere. I have a presentation which I would like to share. This is basically just a disclaimer before I start the presentation. I would like to share it. So the presentation is basically on the draft bill on the ODCB, which was Official Digital Currency Bill of 2019. Now, this bill is not yet an act. Since the topic given is on this act, we'll be discussing the salient features of this particular bill. And once the bill gets enacted as an act, then maybe there would be a lot of changes also which should be taking place in this particular bill. So I'll start. Can I share the presentation screen now? Are you able to see?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So now, before going to the nitty-gritties of this particular topic, I would like to just give you a background of what is cryptocurrency in fact. Now, if you see what exactly is a cryptocurrency, I think many of the students who are there or the interns who are there in today's this particular session, they would be knowing what is cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is nothing but it is a digital money created from codes. Now, in digital currency, there are various codes which are used, and this is a peer-to-peer type of a transaction, which basically talks about building some chains, and these are all protected by your private keys. So when we talk about this particular cryptocurrency, how does it function? It basically is a part of the which is a part of the economy which is being monitored by peer-to-peer group. Now, one of the basic ideas of this particular examples of this cryptocurrency, we have Bitcoins, we have Dogecoins, we have different Ethereum. Now, the various names are given as they evolve. So the first cryptocurrency, as we all know, was the Bitcoin. Now, let's move forward. Now, why there is a need for, is the slide visible, sir?
Yeah, of course it is.
Okay. Now, why this particular innovation in this digital sphere has come into place? There are various theories, there are various notions and opinions regarding this. First is that people, generally the public, when they are into the digital age, for example, as on today, we cannot survive without our Android phones, we cannot survive without our mobile phones, and we want everything at our tip of the finger. So we do not want to go to a bank, stand in a queue, and then try to withdraw money. Now people want convenience. Convenience will happen only when all the products are available on a single window. Now this particular cryptocurrency is actually gaining a lot of traction because many of the policies which are there, which are traditional in nature, are not that much convenient to the new generation. Old generation people or people who are not conversant with the technology, they would be, I think, much more comfortable going to a branch, going to an ATM. But when we talk about the e-commerce industry, which is there, the investment, the various products which are available for investment also, they have to have convenience as a very important element with regard to the transactions. Now, a cryptocurrency, as we all know, it leads to reduces the financial frauds in the system, because as we go along, we'll see that there are a lot of things which are there. There are various advantages in this particular digital currency. And when the bill, in fact, comes into place, there are advantages. That is why the government also wants something to come out of it, so that at least the people who want to have the benefit of this particular system or this particular currency, they can really help it. Now, another, they say that it is also it reduces corruption and entrepreneurship. As I was talking about the startups. Now, startups, a person who has a closed user group, he can also go and start a cryptocurrency chain or cryptocurrency exchange, and then start the transactions between the like-minded parties. And of course, as a central bank or the monetary policy or the government policy makers, cryptocurrency gives a lot of innovation to them also, to attract a lot of investment and also to have technological development, which in fact, if you supplement with the other traditional parts of the economy, it will drive the economy to a large extent. But can we have cryptocurrency? Now, as I said, a cryptocurrency may give us some feeling, and if India is not going ahead with the world, then of course we will be left behind in this particular development. And but these are some of the problems which we may have when we start talking about the sphere or the scope of cryptocurrency in India. Now, when we talk about the bill itself, which has gained a lot of attention. One second. Am I audible? Yeah. Am I audible?
You are audible, sir.
Okay. So now what I was talking about is that this is really a problem, is that deregulation or regulation. This is a big debate which is going on. And the other problem, which many of the people who are gullible or who do not have knowledge about this particular currency or the transaction mode, they fear of spoofing, hacking, payment gateways, they get their files lost. And of course, a lot of issues are there with regard to the security. Now, scalable, of course, it is scalable. And many in India also, the transactions are being permitted, but they are not regulated. So that is why we have more than one, maybe lakhs or millions of people who are having these transactions at their table, and they are doing the transactions, but it is not regulated. But of course, MCA, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, has asked these trading partners to have some sort of discipline when they are undergoing these transactions. Now, moving to the regulation part, before going to the slides, I would like to just give you background of the 2019 bill, which was called as Banning of Cryptocurrency and Regulation of Official Digital Currency Bill, that is ODCB. Now, this particular bill was to create, in fact, was supposed to create a facilitative framework for official digital currency to be issued by the Reserve Bank of India, which is the central bank. And it also seeks to prohibit all private cryptocurrencies in India, but it wants to allow certain exceptions to promote the underlying technology of cryptocurrency and its uses. Now, as per the official estimates, around 70 lakh Indians hold cryptocurrencies worth more than $1 billion. Now, if you look at the valuation of a Bitcoin, which is, I think it crashed because of Musk, his statement, but nonetheless, its valuation is very, very good at present. Again, it has taken off because of the statement which is given by many of the investors who are there. Now, when you talk about the official digital currency bill, this particular bill has got 6 parts. It has got 8 chapters, 27 sections, and 3 schedules. Now, these parts which are there, in fact, there is part 1, which talks about the preliminary and definitions, and it has 2 chapters, chapter 1 and 2. And part 2 is the general prohibition, that is part 2 is general prohibitions, which all transactions are allowed, which all transactions are not allowed. Then part 3 will be regarding the regulation of digital rupees and foreign digital currency. And part 4, it gives powers of the investigating authority. What are the powers which they can exercise? These are all enunciated in part 4. And part 5 talks about the penalties and proceedings. And of course, part 6 is the miscellaneous. Now, this is the brief outline of this particular bill, which, just to tell you in the beginning itself, this is the bill which was prepared in 19, but the bill which is going to be placed in the monsoon session of the parliament, we do not have much idea what is the contour of that bill, whether the same provisions will be there in that bill. But many of the media reports as well as the sources say that the outline of the bill will remain the same, of course, because after 19, we had this particular pandemic, and consultations were also halted. But let's see how the bill comes out to be, or the act, if it gets passed, because it is listed for the monsoon session. Now, this particular, in fact, the bill which was prepared was on the recommendations of an interministerial committee, which in fact gave a lot of suggestions to the preparation of this particular bill. Now, the same committee has pitched for introduction of an official digital currency that will be appropriately regulated by the Reserve Bank of India. So this is the background about the present status of this particular bill. And this is a statement which was given by the Finance Minister, Madam Sitharaman, on February 9. She said that a high-level interministerial committee constituted under the chairmanship of Secretary to study the issues related to virtual currencies and propose specific actions to be taken in the matter of recommended by its report. So this is the statement, and now we see that the bill may be placed in this thing. Now, before I talk about this highlights of the bill, because if I go through the provisions of the act, now the bill, many people, in fact, they are in fact worried about this bill, is that the draft bill seeks to prohibit these following activities. One is mining, holding, selling, trade, issuance, disposal, or use of cryptocurrency in the country. Now, cryptocurrency has been defined in the bill itself. Now, this cryptocurrency has been defined in section 2A of the bill, which talks about section 2A that is your chapter 2, where definitions are given. Now, cryptocurrency, by the definition given in the bill, says that by whatever name called, it means any information or code or number or token not being part of any official digital currency generated through cryptographic means or otherwise providing a digital representation of value which is exchanged with or without consideration, with a promise or a representation of having inherent value in any business activity, which may involve risk of loss or an expectation of profits or income, or functions as a store of value or a unit of account, and includes its use in a financial transaction or investment, but not limited to investment schemes. Now, this is the official definition which is given in the bill. So the bill talks about that these things should be prohibited. That is mining. Now, mining has also been defined. How do you define mining here? Now, mining is an activity aimed at creating a cryptocurrency and or validating a transaction of cryptocurrency between buyer and seller of cryptocurrency. So he is basically doing the technical aspect of creating a cryptocurrency and also validating the transaction which may happen between a buyer and a seller of a cryptocurrency. So is it clear till now? The draft bill, in fact, these are the highlights I'm talking about. It will prohibit the following actions under the bill. Now, if you talk about the provisions regarding the punishments which are given under part 4, under chapter 8 of the bill, which has 4 sections, section 12 to 16. Now, under this bill, mining, holding, selling, or any of the prohibited activities is punishable with a fine or imprisonment up to 10 years or both. And a person who declares and disposes of any cryptocurrency in his possession within, he can declare, suppose if he possesses any cryptocurrency with himself, he can dispose it within 90 days from the commencement of this act. Now, the bill also permits the use or process of technology underlying any cryptocurrency. Now, these are the admissible permissions which can be given by the bill under the bill. It means that the banned activities are prohibited, but you can always use this particular cryptocurrency for the purpose of experiment, for the purpose of research, or for the purpose of teaching as well. Okay. Now the digital rupee. Now the bill also talks about that central government will consult with RBI and it may issue digital rupee as a legal tender. Now we know that many of late, or you can say maybe after the 1991 opening of the Indian economy, and also many changes which have taken place after demonetization, where digital transactions have gained a lot of acceptance across the country. Now, digital rupee, which is there, that it will be different from the, you can say the e-mode of transactions which we are having by mobile banking, by way of your e-commerce transactions. They will be different from that particular features of the transactions. Now, the RBI will also notify a digital currency recognized as legal tender in a foreign jurisdiction. Now, these are all given in the bill as of now, and when the act comes into place, then we'll have more clarity on what exactly will be the contour of this particular act. Now, coming to the next one is now what are the risks which in fact why the cryptocurrency or the official digital bill which is there, or the currency for the cryptocurrency, which is not much of which is creating a lot of fear and apprehension amongst the policymakers. Now, what they feel that the cryptocurrency, they can be used for money laundering, and even because of less knowledge among the consumers about the usage of this particular Bitcoin or any mode of cryptocurrency using the blockchain model, it will also lead to risks to consumers, and consumers may not be able to assess the amount of loss which they may have to incur while undergoing the transactions from this particular type of currency. And of course, the overall concern which is there with the government is the threat to the country's financial stability. Because as you know, as a regulator of the financial system and of the government as the overall overarching control over the whole country's economic and financial stability, it doesn't want anything to happen which may disturb the stability of the country. So these are some of the risks which the policymakers as of now feel. But we also have the advantages which are there. There will be better record keeping of the digital transactions, and of course the FDI, the new modes of cross-border payments, they will also be, you can say, come along with the usage of the cryptocurrency or the official digital currency. Now, these activities which are prohibited under the Act, they are given under Chapter 3 and Section 3 of this particular bill. Now, coming to the part of the bill which talks about the regulation of digital rupee as legal tender and also currency and regulation of foreign digital currency, it comes under Section 4 of Chapter 4 of this particular bill, which talks about RBI in consultation with the government. They will be trying to issue a digital rupee which will be treated as a legal tender, and also a foreign digital currency as foreign currency. So this is this thing. Now, how to mitigate these particular risks which are there in this mode of transaction, or this mode of new, you can say, the new generation people who want to really invest into this digital currencies and cryptocurrencies. Now we have to have some sort of regulations which will try to have some control, because as you also know, the current regulation which has come for the social media giants, for the Facebook, for the WhatsApp, for the Twitter. Now, a lot of resistance is there from these particular social media giants which are located outside the country. But regulation is needed for various purposes, but over-regulation is also not that much healthy for any new innovation which is taking place. Now, as I said before, the cryptocurrency has been defined, and this has been defined, and some say it is too broad, and there have to be some restrictive micro definitions will also come through. So let's see how this bill is presented in the parliament and how this particular problem is taken care of by this thing. Now I have divided this particular presentation into two parts. One is regarding the part one gives you the highlight of the bill. Hello.
I can hear you.
Yeah, but the slide is not moving. Oh, okay, now it has come. No. Now this is, again, I'll not go into this, but in the context, as we all know, most of the people are aware about the cryptocurrency. It emerged in the early 2000s, and the first transaction, as I said, was around 11 years back. Now, cryptocurrency is a person-to-person electronic cash system. Now, here in this case, it allows online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without the need of a financial institution. Now, this is the problem area where the government as well as the Reserve Bank, they said there is nobody to, in fact, regulate it. There is no financial institution, and it is person-to-person or peer-to-peer electronic cash movement. Whereas in the case of traditional currency, of course, there's the Reserve Bank, there is the monetary authority, there is the government, which are legally bound to control this particular legal tender, how much to put into the system, how much to bring it out of the system. Oh, sorry. Okay. Now, another they are not, now this is another problem area, because the risk which emanates is basically from the lack of any backing by a sovereign guarantee, and hence it is not considered as a legal tender. Now, this bill also talks about this particular aspect when it says that in consultation with RBI, we may have some sort of a backing. They may consider, I'm not saying we will have, but they may consider to give it the shape of a legal tender, which is called the, you can say, the digital rupee, which can be treated as a legal tender, and they will be in fact controlled by the controller of the currency. Now, cryptocurrency transactions are recorded and shared with all the users on the network. Now, this is another advantage which says that it is not open to hacking, it is not open to any type of pilferage of the transactions which is taking place. So since this is recorded and shared with all the users on the network, we have this issue of sanctity of their integrity and the safety. Now, this is how they use it. If you are willing, then only you can go and accept the cryptocurrencies and trade, and value fluctuates, as we all know. And they are also nowadays used as utility tokens, which provide holder access to a company's goods and services. And now this is old data, but nonetheless, there were more than 3,000 cryptocurrencies across the world with daily global trading volume of around USD 50 billion. But as I gave you the figure, as on 21st June, it is 31.33 trillion US dollars. This is the market cap of global cryptocurrencies. Now, how the countries are in fact controlling them? Several risks related to cryptocurrencies have emerged. These are all because of illicit activities, lack of consumer protection, and many countries like several countries like Japan, Canada, Switzerland, they regulate their cryptocurrencies under the anti-money laundering provision. And here I would like to mention that in the Indian bill also, there are amendments which are being proposed under section 26. 27 of the bill, amendment to certain enactments, they are being proposed. Now, most of the enactments could be under the FEMA, Foreign Exchange Management Act, and also under the PMLA, that is Prevention of Money Laundering Act. So these are some of the enactments which could be amended once the bill, this thing comes into place, takes shape of an act. Now, Japan, they have accepted certain cryptocurrencies as a legal payment method, whereas China, Saudi Arabia, etc., they have prohibited their use of currency. These are some of the happenings which have taken place. 2013 and 17, RBI, Ministry of Finance, issued several advisories to the banks and other stakeholders to protect their customers, and also to mitigate the risk which may emanate, and it may hamper the your banking system at large. Now, in April 18, as we all know, this was a big flare-up by the, you can say the, even Supreme Court also intervened in this, when April 2018, RBI prohibited entities regulated by it from dealing or providing services for dealing with virtual currencies. But in 2020, the Supreme Court, in fact, said that this was not acceptable, and now it is still the trading is allowed, but regulation is not there. Now these are the risks which are there, which the bill also talks about: high volatility in prices, vulnerability to money laundering, and financial stability. And this is already I have touched upon this particular in the draft bill also, ban cryptocurrencies in the country and provide official digital currency. This is the ODC which we are talking about, and which if comes into place will have a lot of protections and a lot of you can say firewalls, which will in fact give a lot of confidence to the investor as well as the public at large. Now, this I've already defined what is defined in the bill as a cryptocurrency, and this is prohibited, and this is prohibited for, these are some of the 8 activities which the use of cryptocurrency is prohibited under the bill. Use as a medium of exchange, store of value or unit of account, as a payment system, as providing services such as registering, trading, selling, or clearing of cryptocurrency to individuals, trading it with other currencies, issuing financial products related to it, and using it as a basis of credit, issuing it as a means of raising funds, and issuing it as means for investment. Now, these are the 8 activities which are not allowed under the prohibited transactions under section 3 of chapter 3 of this particular bill. So if the bill comes out in this particular form, then this section 3 will talk about the prohibited transactions, which are 8 at this particular point of time in the draft bill. Now, this is what I was talking about under the exemption, same section. The exemptions are provided for use of technology or process for experiment, research, or teaching is permitted. For example, suppose if I'm delivering this particular talk today on this cryptocurrency, and if I use some live examples of cryptocurrency to show you how the transactions take place, then of course that is permitted under the bill. Now the digital rupee, which we are talking about, is under chapter 4, under section 4. Chapter 4, section 4 talks about digital rupee, which will be as a legal tender. Now this will be in consultation with RBI. The central government may approve a digital rupee to be legal tender. And under section 5, the RBI may also notify a foreign digital currency as a foreign currency. So section 4 and 5 talk about this digital rupee as well as the digital foreign digital currency. And what is foreign digital currency is nothing but a digital currency which is recognized as a legal tender in a foreign jurisdiction. So these two things may come into play when the bill gets approval by the parliament. Now, what are the penalties? Now, mining, holding, selling, issuing, transferring, or using of cryptocurrency will be punishable under the act once it comes into force, and the prison sentence will be 10 years or both. And even a person who is advertising, soliciting, or assisting or inducing participation in cryptocurrency is also punishable under the act with imprisonment of up to 7 years. And when he's acquiring, storing, or disposing of cryptocurrency, the intent of using it for non-commercial purpose will be punishable with a fine. So the regulations, when they are issued after the bill is enacted as an act, then only we'll come to know exact amount, how much it is punishable. But just for information, in Schedule 1 of this particular bill, they have offenses and fines which are given. And I think you can have a look at those. Of course, I have it in my presentation as well. Now, bill provides for a transition period of 90 days from the commencement of this act, during which a person may dispose of any cryptocurrency. So what will happen in this is basically, suppose if a person is holding, when the act comes into place, he will get 90 days period. But again, I was reading somewhere, this 90 days period, transition period, will not have any value, because they generally, the value of this cryptocurrency fluctuates. And that again will depend upon how the rules are notified by the government once the bill takes shape into an act. Now, I'll come to the last part. Do I have some time more, or should I stop at this?
Yeah, sir, you can proceed. No worries. We have a time.
Okay. Now, coming to the next part is key issues and analysis. Now, as we all know, what is the rationale of this particular bill? They've talked about, you see, any money or any mode of transaction or any asset or any digital currency or any digital rupee or whatever name you call it, it will have three main attributes. It is used as a unit of account, and it is basically medium of exchange and store of value. For example, if you take gold, now gold is actually very good asset for investment, because it has got huge amount of exchange value, store value. But when you go to market and want to purchase some vegetables, that does not, in fact, it becomes very, very difficult to convert it into medium of exchange at a short notice. So the money has to be, it has three main attributes which we talk about. And then in most countries, the government is backing the money. For example, in India also, the money which is there in the system, it is in fact issued by the government and backed by authority. For example, Reserve Bank of India promises to pay the bearer a sum of money. If you read at the currency note or the note which is in your hand, there's a promise by the central government to pay, and RBI takes that in fact guarantee to pay. Now, entities authorized to hold money and enable payments are licensed by a government agency. Now, basically, if cryptocurrency or any mode of transaction which is not licensed by government authority, it loses its value over a period of time. And more so when there are risks which are emanating, which are dynamic in nature, and we do not have any regulation, centralized regulation to validate those transactions. This is what is happening with regard to cryptocurrency, because they are not backed as of now in India and many other countries across the world, because they do not have any government regulated central system to regulate them. It is a peer-to-peer type of a transaction. Now, this is what is happening with vis-a-vis the traditional money. Now, cryptocurrency, they are only in digital form. Suppose if you want to pay somebody in a physical form, you cannot make the payment. Secondly, there is no central authority that validates and guarantees transactions. And the transactions are validated by other users and then stored in a secure manner. Now, these are the blocks and blockchains which are created, which generally take into account the authenticity and the trust which is created by in the system of cryptocurrency. So there is no central authority which will say, okay, this much amount is having this much value, this much amount is the exchange value today. But in the case of cryptocurrency, they are in fact pegged against the US dollar, and sometimes even 60,000 per Bitcoin was traded of late. But of late it has come down, but nonetheless it still has a very great conversion value with regard to the dollar. Now this is blockchain and all. I think I'll not go into that, but the our bill also talks about the definitions. Now this is how the process happens. Unlike a physical currency note, it is easy to copy a digital item. Now suppose if you want to counterfeit a currency note, you require a whole set of machinery, whole set of new technology to do it. But in the case of digital transactions, a lot of frauds are taking place. You can always hack, you can always you can say create a parallel website and without any the other person knowing about it. So it is very easy to copy a digital signature, a digital form of currency. And so there is an inherent challenge of ensuring there is no double payment with the same currency. Whereas in the case of cryptocurrencies, because of these blockchains, this particular problem is solved. And there are code names which may be used to protect the piracy. It is anonymous actually. These transactions are anonymous, and everybody is given a code, and they can access their account balance of other users, and everybody can use their account code and code names to in fact access. So they are fully protected. This is one of the rationale for the draft bill. And when a set of payments happen, they are bunched together as block, and other users verify the block by checking whether the person making the payment had sufficient balance. Now this block is considered valid only if all the transactions on it are validated by majority of users. Suppose in a transaction there are 50 users. So if the majority of them validate the transaction of the block, then it is considered to be a valid transaction. Now at this stage, the block is connected to the previous block using cryptography and published on the system. So a chain of such blocks of transaction is called a blockchain, and this ledger is available to all users and validated by them. It is form of a distributed ledger technology. Now in the bill also which we have, the distributed digital ledger technology, this has been defined. Quickly I can just define it what it is. In fact, as per the bill definition, it is defined under section 1E. It says a distributed ledger technology means any technology that enables transactions and data to be recorded, shared, and synchronized across multiple data stores or ledgers. Or it is a distributed network of different network participants through the use of independent computers referred to as nodes who record, share, and synchronize. So basically, they in fact are meant for recording, sharing, and synchronizing the transactions and data in their respective electronic ledgers instead of keeping data centralized in the case of traditional ledger. So I think it's clear it is in fact a form of a digital ledger. We have this in the banking system, we have ledgers, which of course in the earlier system we had these big registers were there, but of course in the new online or the CBS mode, we have the digital type of ledgers. But this is again a ledger which is having a digital form. Now cryptography is used to make it very difficult to change the transaction in a validated block. So cryptography is again protected by the keys which are there, the private keys are there. Unless you share the private key. Yes, madam. Can I stop at this?
You can proceed, sir. No worries, no worries.
So somebody was asking something, so I thought
somebody has actually unmuted her system actually.
Okay. This is the process by which the benefits which are there, and the benefit of this particular bill, the interministerial committee also felt that the digital ledger technology could improve the efficiency and many people could be included in the financial system. And it can also help to lower the cost of personal identification for know your customers and improve access to credit. And global regulators such as IMF have also noted the benefits of these cryptocurrencies, and they provide cheaper, faster, and more efficient transactions. This is what I was telling you in the beginning. Any person or any transaction which you need, it should have these particular features. They have to be cheap, they have to be fast and more efficient. For example, they can be used for even small value cross-border transfers where cost of remittance in the traditional mode could be much, much higher. And also they are very secure, transparent, and improved ease of auditing, because most of the transactions are moving online. They are in the digital form, so the trails and logs can be captured, and then they can be, I think, audited as well. These are risks which I've already talked about. They do not have any sovereign guarantee. They are speculative in nature. Again, speculation is a very, very big issue because it can lead to a lot of addiction with regard to the asset trading in the case of cryptocurrency. And they can be very, very highly volatile, just like your stock exchanges and other assets and products and goods which are being traded on in the exchanges. For example, in 2017, when Bitcoin was 20,000 US dollars, it fell to, just within a 1 year, it fell to $3,800. So you look at the volatility of this particular trading, which is there. So speculation is the disadvantage, and a user loses access to the cryptocurrency if they lose their private key. So traditional digital banking account, what you do, you can reset your password. You can go to your branch and you tell that fellow, okay, sir, my this particular password is blocked, or somebody has hacked it, or somebody has stolen it, or I've lost it. You can reset it. But in this case, if you lose the cryptocurrency, your private key, you lose the access to your account. So in some cases, private keys are stored by technical service providers, which are prone to malware or hacking. Again, many agencies are there who in fact try to help. These particular service providers are there who help the investors to store their private keys. But again, they're prone to malware or any other virus attack or malware or ransomware attack. They are more vulnerable to criminal activity and money laundering. And as we know that they provide greater anonymity. That means we do not know who's making the payment because public keys are in fact engaging in transactions, and they cannot be directly linked to an individual. So anonymous transactions generally take place in this particular currency. And thirdly, the central bank cannot regulate the supply of cryptocurrencies in the economy. As we know, money supply is very, very important aspect to regulate the inflation, to regulate the credit supply in the country or the economy. But in the case of cryptocurrencies, no regulator is there. You do not know how many billions of dollars are flowing in the economy and whether they are leading to inflation, whether they're leading to lopsided growth in certain sector, or they are just a virtual type of an economy which is there. And again, because of this, it can lead to financial instability in the country if their use becomes widespread. And lastly, validating transactions is energy intensive. Now, when we talk about the environmental protection, when we talk about the global warming, it seems that the transactions, because most of the transactions are being routed through computers, nodes, exchanges, mobile phones, whatever. Now they require a lot of energy, and energy security is very, very important. And I think just an example is given here. The total electricity use of Bitcoin mining in 2018 was equivalent to that of mid-sized economies such as Switzerland. So you can just imagine how much amount of energy the Bitcoin mining or these cryptocurrencies would use when the whole world starts using this particular transaction. Okay, I think these are how other countries are doing it. Canada, they are regulated under the Money Laundering Act and terrorist financing laws. And Canada also, the trading of digital currencies on an open exchange is permitted, and revenue generated from cryptocurrencies is subjected to income tax. And there in Canada, the people can also use to buy or sell goods and services. But Japan is also allowing them to as a payment system. So these are some of the risks and the benefits which are being weighed by the various countries, and they are using it to their advantage. In fact, many countries. Now, cryptocurrency are registered, regulated in Japan by the Financial Services Authority. In New York, cryptocurrency as a payment mechanism is permitted, but they have to be licensed, and every license is required to comply with anti-fraud, anti-money laundering, cyber security, information security related regulations. They are permitted, but a lot of strict regulations are there in New York. And China, Thailand, Indonesia, and Taiwan, they have banned the use of cryptocurrency. So these are some of the, if you, for example, take for China, of course, is a huge market for any cryptocurrency, but they've banned it as of now. And many other countries, they are permitting, but warnings about their high risk. For India, comes under this category. We have permitted cryptocurrency transactions, but they are not yet regulated, and people are on and off. They are being warned about their high risk. And European regulators for securities, banking, and insurance and pension, they have issued a joint statement cautioning the virtual currencies are highly risky and unsuitable as investment, savings, or retirement planning products. Okay, so I think I'll stop at this, and we can take some questions, because this is the imprisonment which is there in the act, sorry, in the bill. If it comes into force, then I think we will be getting this particular clarity on the particular aspects. Now, these are the sources from where I took some information to prepare this particular presentation. You can always search for them. Okay, sir. So this is all I have for you. And now if you have any questions, then please you can ask the questions.
Students, if you have any questions, please either you can unmute yourself or write it on the chat box. I do agree, Ramarao might be having some questions. So Ramarao, please, if you are on the board. Sir, I have one question, of course.
Yeah.
So, in the meet itself, we were discussing how cryptocurrency is actually helping out by the use of blockchain. But if suppose majority of the people are in the same community or of the same community, so there can be a transaction which goes in case of majority people, that can be the cases.
You see, when a group, in fact, because as you know, this particular transactions which take place, they are in fact peer-to-peer group. So they will have already some understanding about how much how much amount they are going to exchange at one point of time. So the blockchains which are created, they are not vulnerable. They are very much confident. They are very much protected by the algorithm which they are using to create these blockchains. So I think your question is regarding the security aspect or regarding the volume of transactions which they.
My question is in regard to, suppose we are having 10 people, 10 of the people, those who are among these particular transactions, okay, and 8 are actually going with it and 2 are not going with that particular transaction, or they are against of that transaction. How it will happen then?
The majority, as I said, no, the validation of the transaction will take by the acceptance of the majority of the
majority. That is what, if suppose 2 is not agreeing on that, then also the payment will be there, transaction will be there.
The transaction will go through.
But in the modern traditional way, the current traditional way, it is not like such. It depends solely upon the person.
Totally individual preference, no, in the present thing. Because it is regulated, and you see what is happening in the traditional mode of investment or any banking transaction which you make place or investment of assets which you make, there are protection of your consumer rights. Suppose even if in banking, if the service is not good, if the service is bad, if you are overcharged, if you are somebody is selling the product without your consent, then you're protected by the laws, consumer laws. But in the case of cryptocurrency or blockchain transactions, that protection is not there, because you are mutually agreeing to undergo the transaction. There is no regulatory body to provide the government backing to provide you the protection. So that is one of the major disadvantages of the blockchain transactions, where the grievance redressal mechanism is absent vis-a-vis the traditional banking or traditional mode of transactions.
And as per the India per se, the regulations, and as per our infrastructure in regard to internet facility and all, are we really prepared for this?
You see, we already have many platforms where digital services are being provided, be it banking, be it your even this thing, the vaccination for COVID, because it also requires a lot of connectivity. And I think we are prepared, but there are issues with regard to connectivity, and that will be in areas of hilly terrain, maybe Northeast India, maybe the hinterlands where the speed of the network is very slow. But of course, when you're using your mobile, because many of the transactions are taking place on mobile, and suppose if you're using a plan which gives you a lot of speed on your mobile, then of course this connectivity aspect does not hold that good, because even in remote areas now you can stream movies on Netflix, you can watch any other thing in the remote areas as well. So I think this may not be a hindrance with regard to the educated population or the new generation or the youth, but it can be a problem for the poor people who are not educated. But of course, this cryptocurrency as of now is not meant for them, because they will not understand at all the risks and the mode of this thing. But suppose if a person persuades somebody, or if you have a friend who is not he's not that educated, he's not that technology savvy, you can always motivate and again bring him into the system. But again, that is his risk. That is his risk.
Okay. And one last question from my side. How you preview this way forward as a 10 years from now? Can our RBI or our banks can go
It
for?
all depend about how the regulation pans out, because once the bill is presented in what shape, because what I told you today is a draft bill which was there in 19, and this, I think more or less the same bill is going to be presented, or the in the parliament monsoon session. So once the regulations, it all depends, but I think they will have a lot of acceptance when the clarity in the particular regulation comes into force. But if a lot of penal provisions are there, a lot of penalties are there, and criminal cases, because under the bill, CRPC provisions can be invoked. The courts, they have the right to recall the what to say. There are certain restrictions which are there. They can always act upon those restrictions. The courts have a lot of power. The investigating authorities have power under the CRPC. So the people, if they're scared, they will not have much acceptance in India. But I think going forward, if it becomes user friendly, it becomes public friendly, then naturally going 10 years ahead is a long time. 10 years is a long time.
Yeah. Students, do you have any questions, or anyone is having any other questions, so that we can take, or you can write it on the chat box. I request IT team to present a certificate of gratitude to our honorable speaker, Dr. Anil sir. It was wonderful, sir, to listen to you, and the way you covered actually exactly the policy per se. See, students, the presentation in the initial phase, sir has presented the how exactly the bill is, and in that particular presentation, there was mentioning of the parts of that particular bill, how the chapters are being defined, how the schedules are working, what are all the miscellaneous. So if you are a student, or you are working, or you are listening or learning towards public policy, this is the initial actual learning you should know. What all are the parts of the public policy, what are the parts of that particular bill. And then going towards, of course, the current bill, which is actually in a draft form, which has come out. Sir has given a various good narrations on that. What can be the disadvantages and what can be the advantages of this. He has actually covered each of the segment, how the international countries are looking out for this cryptocurrency, how our South Asian countries are actually banning this particular cryptocurrency, and still countries like US, they are supporting it. So it is a mix actually solutions coming across from all over the countries. But of course, having a connect on those things, that it is not legalized as per the RBI, as per the regulations. So India is not going for it. And of course, we are going for a digital currency, but in another mode. That is what Sir has covered up. That is what the digital rupee, which we are discussing on. So thank you, sir. Thanks for actually covering this ODCB. It was great to hear you, and my gratitude to you, namaskar to you. And I will be presenting certificate by mail also. And I was trying to Ajay sir also to come in and speak on the regard of startup, because Anil sir and Ajay sir and I both are actually in one of the IGNOU ISC Council members. We are the part of that. And from there, I actually requested Anil sir and Ajay sir to come up and speak on this. Thank you. Thanks, sir, for this.
And I extend my best wishes to all the interns, as well as be safe and do well in the future as well. Thank you, all the faculty members and Deep sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks, sir. Thanks. Akshay, you can move, proceed to the next session.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can start the slide that is of
So should I start presenting the good governance model or the
good governance model? Good governance model.
Okay.
So students, actually today is our second speaker, Mr. Sparsh Maheshwari. He is not there. He got some of the commitment from his office, and that is why he is not there. But based on his, of course, topic, and as I am also a public policy professional, so I can very well take up what all he was going to discuss. He was going to discuss on a segmentation of that is Aadhaar card scheme. And today I will actually narrate this particular Aadhaar card scheme in comparison to good governance parameters. Whatever the session I'm going to take, you will have a knowledge on good governance parameters too, and based on those good governance parameters, how exactly our Aadhaar card scheme is actually lying out. So usually, whenever we talk about the good governance parameters, there are 9 to 10 parameters which we discuss upon whenever we go for a good governance. Firstly, how much actually it is covered with the stakeholders, how much it is connected to the stakeholders per se. Secondly, how much it is legitimate actually the people, those who are actually for that particular scheme or for that particular policy, they are using it. The inclusiveness part of that particular policy or the scheme, how much popular that particular scheme is, and what are the effectiveness part of that particular scheme or the policy. How exactly that particular scheme or the policy is transparent and responsive towards people. Coming to sustainability, how exactly is it viable for next 5 years or next 10 years? It will be there or not. Then what can be the localization modes, or what can be the localization workings on those particular policy, and what can be the localization or subsidiary workings on that particular schemes. Lastly, is really that particular scheme or is that really that particular policy is scalable or applicable to all states, all countries, or even for all the stakeholders. And lastly, of course, what is the coherence with that other policies, how it is very well connected to other policies which we are using or which we can use, or how we can connect to other schemes. That is what it is actually reflected. So Aadhaar card is a best model which we can discuss on the parameters of good governance. So Aadhaar card journey started, let me give you a background here. Aadhaar card journey started in year 2006. Firstly, in the year 2006, Ministry of Information and Information Technology and Communication people, they have come up with one of the idea, why not to go with a unique ID for all marginal people or poor people in India, so that we can give some of the support to them. In that year, in 2006, it was just a notion or it was just a thought of ministry. But in the sphere of, you can say, 3 years or so, that particular idea becomes a scheme. That is what Aadhaar card scheme and UIDI. And in year 2009, Nandan Nilekani, former, of course, board member of Infosys, he took over the charge as a first chairman for that particular Aadhaar scheme, that UIDI, and he has got the status of cabinet minister for its rolling out the complete scheme towards all of the Indian people. And in the same year, Sri Ram Sevakji, IAS, he also took a charge of first UIDI Director General. That is how the story started, the background of. And if I take about the Aadhaar card scheme on the parameter of number of stakeholders or who all are the stakeholders, if you see, Aadhaar card is, you can say, a must-know point or must-know for all of us. And if you take the schemes, if you take the banks, if you say take the banks of either unscheduled banks or scheduled banks or private banks, RBI, SBI, PNB, for each of the banks, PAN card, this Aadhaar card is necessary like a PAN card. And for any of the government schemes, either it is rolled out by Government of India or by state governments, or by any of the ministries, Aadhaar card is mandatory for that particular thing. So it contains the stakeholder of all the banking system. It contains the stakeholder of all the people, those who are actually using this particular monetary transaction, I must say. And then end users are the people across India, of course. Please move on to the next one. Yeah. So if you can enlarge this one. So how legitimate is this particular scheme is actually? How it is covering from small bit of people it have started. If you see, can you scroll up? It's been now being used by 125 crore people in India. Marginally, some 5 crore people are left out using this particular But this journey started in 2010-11 with minimal of 0.42 crore people. And now we have covered up to 125 crore people. So this particular graph that which I have taken it from the source of Aadhaar card itself. If you go to the uidi.gov.in, you can get this particular graph there itself. So this graph I have taken up just to give you the insight how legitimate this particular policy is and why the people, because the end beneficiaries are the people and they are using it. So it is very much legitimate in their, as per the parameters of the good governance. Please move on to the next one. So this is a very basic phenomena of any of the policy. If I talk about the inclusiveness, once the Aadhaar card scheme has come out, it came out with the notion that there will be two languages used for those particular things. That is for Indian English, the bilingual languages which we are using for daily electronic society. Then government of India has come up with different, of course, approach. They have started 11 different languages as an option to choose the people, but to be chosen by the people. Once they are filling up any of the Aadhaar card schemes or any of the form for Aadhaar card or any of the feedback mechanism form they are filling up, so they can use up all these 11 languages. And that is how this has been approached for inclusiveness. They have taken the notion that, of course, it's not only for the men and the women, they are taking out even the transgenders also, and others also they have taken up. So in once you are filling up the Aadhaar card, you need to mention your status and your all the things where you are actually, what about your gender, what about your gender. So in that particular paragraph itself, they are taking up the notion of the inclusiveness. Popular opinion and effectiveness, if I talk about, if you can just zoom in this particular graph, Akshaya, something more, okay, make a slide. Right up. If you see the this particular transaction, how the transaction is moving up from the beginning to the last, it has covered up the popular opinion of the people, why they are going for this Aadhaar card scheme, or why they are, what is the effectiveness of that particular Aadhaar card scheme. They have started in a very small, you can say, with a smaller segment of schemes, and they have come up with somewhere 135 plus schemes across country. So this is how the popular opinion of the schemes has come up. The effectiveness can be related to the graph and the data which has been reflected, which we will be sharing to you also. Please move on to the next one. Okay, and if I talk about as the parameter of the good governance, why this particular scheme is called as a transparent or why it is being sustainable. So if you can zoom in, Akshaya, this particular slide, I can very well tell why exactly this transparency is there. See, if you see and if you go to the website of UIDAI, you can go and you can ask either for QR code of your this thing Aadhaar card, or you can actually they are using the biometric devices to just give an authenticated document to those people, those who are actually working out to get you enabled this particular Aadhaar card scheme. They are authenticating each and every document for that. They are come up with eKYC where we can very well put in our all the details through the feedback mechanism and submit it to the on the website, and then we can actually update our websites on those. And they have a developer sections on those things, and that is why I am taking up that they have this particular scheme is sustainable because each year they are actually taking up the training and testing and certification for their staff, for their people, those who are working for the Aadhaar card scheme. That it will not be go off in a day or so. And that is why this training, this testing and certification ecosystem is actually been created by Aadhaar or UIDAI. So that is how they are actually checking up for the data authentication and for the people. And that is what they are actually looking out for sustainability, how this particular scheme or how this particular Aadhaar card can be a sustainable measure for the people, those who are actually using it. Please move on to the next one. If you see the responsiveness, suppose I am a Aadhaar card user, or you are, any of you people are having an Aadhaar card. And if you have any of the query related to Aadhaar card, there is an ecosystem where you can vouch your complaint either online mode, or you can go offline to any of the Aadhaar service centers. It is spread across India, across, of course, urban areas, rural areas. Even for the rural areas, we have come up with the CSC centers. So that is what the responsiveness can be dealt on. And if you people don't have an Android phone, or if you don't have an online system, or if you don't have your this thing CSC or ASK is very much far away, and you have a basic phone, then also you can very well call in to 1947 and get your OTP or your queries in regard to this particular Aadhaar card scheme. So this is very much responsive. They have come up with the CRM, that is customer relationship management, which is actively working for these types of things. They have the system where they are updating the Aadhaar card. They are enrolling for the people for the Aadhaar card. They have the regulations for the Aadhaar card updation and this thing. They have the 32 chapters in the states for this particular thing. Even they have set up a contact centers to act as a center point for resolving any of the queries, resolving any of the grievances. Even people are going in the residential areas. They have the accessibility to those as residential areas also. They have launched up their toll-free number also. So this is the sort of where responsiveness for the Aadhaar card scheme is actually very well working in. They ensure the complete safety, complete you can say document verification for each of the person. They are working for these people, and they are actually making a relationship. One-to-one relationship is there. Even one-to-many relationships are they are making up, because they are covering various schemes. They are coming up various government schemes. They are coming up various government ministries, and that is how they are actually very well responsiveness towards that particular Aadhaar card scheme. Once I talk about the coherence, what exactly the coherence are in regard to Aadhaar card scheme. See, this particular Aadhaar card scheme is being actually working towards for the people, and government of India, ministries and departments, somewhere 45 ministries and departments are working this particular Aadhaar card scheme, and they have enabled somewhere 304 total schemes for this particular Aadhaar card. So you can very well judge how exactly the Aadhaar card scheme is focusing towards the people, and they are actually supporting the people for that. Please move on to the next one. Akshay, is it end up or?
No, sir, one second.
Yeah, just give me that slide that where we have covered this thing. Last we were covering that is of responsiveness.
Yeah, 2 more pages left. I just had an error in Zoom. It got closed automatically. Yes, sir.
So scalability, if you can zoom in this particular thing, why we are talking about the scalability and replication of this particular. See, Aadhaar has linked to the bank accounts, and you can see how I have taken only the scale up to from 2014 to 2020. That has been actually reflected in the Aadhaar card report, the annual report of Aadhaar card, that is 2020. So they have covered somewhere around 68.9 crore bank accounts using Aadhaar. So this reflection is of progress of unique Aadhaar linkages to the bank accounts. And you can see how the scalability of these particular schemes are in regard to Aadhaar card. And that is how they have the other presentations also, wherein they are giving in the pitching in how Aadhaar cards are being actually linked to various schemes too in a graphical mode. And even for each of the schemes, how that particular value of that particular project is, value of that particular scheme is. They have given that particular thing also in their presentation in 2020 report. So the scalability and replication is towards, of course, approaching higher ends, and that is why I'm saying that the responsiveness towards this particular scheme and the scalability of this particular scheme is taking a upper limit, I must say, going up, because we are only left out somewhere around 5 crore people out of saying 130 crore people we are having in the population, and 125 crore we have actually touched down. So that is what the Aadhaar card scheme is telling about, how responsiveness it is. Please move on to the next one. So, yeah, please move to next. Yeah, and that is what, if you see the Aadhaar card, where they have covered, the complete green area is they have covered up. So that 5 crore people are left out in northeast areas and Jammu and Kashmir. Rest of all states have been covered up. And yeah, rest of all they have covered up. Secondly, if you see in this particular slide, there are certain green, dark greens and certain light green areas. So dark green means they have covered up each and everywhere, and in the light green, some marginal people are actually still left out. And for these people, and for these, I must say, they are trying up for localizing more and more towards enabling Aadhaar card scheme using the CSC centers. Yeah, please. I think it's been end up. Okay. So please move on to the first one, the top one. So if I see Aadhaar card scheme, we have covered each of the parameter of the good governance. That is, Aadhaar card is having a stakeholders, 125 crores. Legitimacy it is having because all are using it. Inclusiveness, it has taken up all the languages and all the genders. They are not at all gender biased for those things. Popular opinion, you can very well take in how people are actually going for it. Effectiveness, the way people, the way schemes, the way actually other ministries are actually supporting this particular Aadhaar card scheme, the effectiveness can, you can very well vouch on that. Transparency and responsiveness, how exactly you can very well go in on the online mode or even the offline mode and check up what all the things are covered up for my Aadhaar card and for the people Aadhaar card. How we can actually take up our e-Aadhaar card also. Sustainability, they are taking up each and every sessions for their people, for the ecosystem. That is what they are covering. And subsidiary and localization, I have covered how they are coming up with certain centers, either ASK centers or with the CSC centers for making people to actually come in, ask for their queries, ask for their any of the support which they required for coming up for the Aadhaar card scheme. That is what scalability, of course, we have covered how scalable it is, and coherence to other policies or the schemes, Government of India officers, ministries, departments, each and every department is actually helping it out to Aadhaar card, and they are using this Aadhaar card scheme for various DBT, I must say, direct benefits transfer. If you see the Jan Dhan Yojana, that has been actually linked up to Aadhaar card. If you see the Ujala scheme, that has been linked up to the Aadhaar card. If you see gas booking, it has been very well linked to our Aadhaar card. If you see the Manrega, it has been highly been actually enabled with Aadhaar card scheme. So for each of the scheme, for any of the beneficiary projects or any of the direct DBT, direct beneficiary transfer, Aadhaar card is mandatory for all, and that is why actually this is the one main reason why the more and more inclusiveness towards this Aadhaar card scheme is there. So this is for today's Aadhaar card scheme and the good governance parameter. Why I took this good governance parameter? Because once you people will be going to present your things in your presentation for team meeting. I must agree, or I must say that you might be going for these parameters too. Once you will reflect with some of the policies for those 3 days. And these are the 9 pointers for which you can work in, how the good governance is working. And on these, based on these things, you will also present during team meeting. I appreciate if someone of you, from among you people, actually took this particular good governance parameters on your presentation. So I am ending up with my first presentation. Actually, this was the part of Spurs Maheshwari, but he was stuck up somewhere, and that is why I took this one. how Aadhaar card is actually helping out people and what the good governance parameters are. Akshay, you can start the second presentation.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks. So whenever we talk about the public policy, in the instances of decision making, we all are being stuck up. And our today's topic is based on that. What are those challenges when we talk about the public policy and when we talk about the challenges for public policy or decision making? So this is the outline how I am going to present. I will take on that how decision making stages are there. What are the public policy concepts and cycles previously, how it was, and what are the present scenario of that particular. How difference in foreign policy to public policy are, and what are the forms of decision making, what are their characteristics, and what are the skill set you exactly required for that particular thing. And one case study that is of US that I will present it on this particular presentation. Yeah, please move on to the next one. So I have taken, of course, this thing how stages are for the public policy are, and you people might be knowing. Once we go for an agenda setting proceeds with the formulation, then we go for a decision making, then we go for an implementation, and then we evaluate. This is the basic set stage for all any of the public policy. But there are the precede and there are the leading termination of the policy too. Why? Because some way I have taken this particular termination of the policy when we are discussing about the incremental policy. Why we are going for this evaluation? Suppose sometimes we see or we foresee that this policy is not going to work on, then we evaluate for the termination of that particular policy also, and that is why it has been reflected that we can actually go for termination of the policy, and for that also we require an evaluation. And formulation, of course, again, we need to set out an agenda for that. Even for formulating of any of the policy, we need to set an agenda for that. And that is why it has been written that agenda needs to be preceded before formulating any of the policy. Now I come up why the decision-making forms. Once we come up with a public policy, there are certain forms of decision-making. And these forms are either the group thinking or the poly thinking or the convergent divergence, that is conclave. So I will take on how exactly these all are, what are the specifications for this, and what are the skill sets required for this particular decision-making process. Please move on to the next one. So if you see the public policy cycle in the earlier stages, when it was started in 1956 by Les Powell, he has mentioned 7 of the stages on the public policy. That is was intelligence, promotion, prescription, invocation, application, termination, and appraisal. But in stages, in somewhere around 20 years of this particular cycle of public policy, in the year 2006, Jan and Bagridge have predefined all the stages into 4 those stages of public policy, that is formulation, decision making, implementation, and evaluation. So somewhere each of the 4 or 7 segments which we are actually talking about in 1956, that has been framed out 2:1, 2:1, I must say. If I talk about the intelligence and promotion, that was talking about the formulation. If I talk about the prescription, invocation, and application, that is what we were talking about the decision making and implementation. And once termination and appraisal is, that is what the evaluation is. So we have come up the cycle of, we have covered this particular cycle, how it was from 1956 to 1975. Please move on to the next one. So basically, what all the critics, whenever we talk about the public policy, you might be thinking of what we are talking about the public policy. Why is it required for that? Usually, the critics of the public policy cycle is more or less people are talking about this is a very bookish approach. Actually, we are not taking out any account of what all the ground realities are, what all the ground problems are, what can be the complex problems, and we are not thinking of our needs. We are not thinking about complex situations or complex on-ground situations. This is what the primarily notion of any of the public policy, as per the critics, I must say. People are very well defining it that whenever we talk about the public policy, they do say that this should be actually a framework where we should be more of inclusiveness. We should talk about more of the interactive form of public policy. Although it is there, but critics have their own interests. Critics have their own views on that, and that is why this particular critics are coming up. Let me give you the characteristic of how the foreign policy exactly is. Once I talk about the foreign policy, I'm just giving the notion of the public policy, what all the stages were there, how it's been actually the cycle was there, what was the process, and how we narrowed down the public policy. Whenever we talk about any of the foreign public policy, a power intervention is always involved because if you see the boardroom of any of the defense ministry or any of the defense establishment, more or less a defined set of routines are there, a defined set of authorities are being present there, and they have a power ruling on those things. A different set of power is hierarchy is there, and as per those hierarchies, actually the decisions are coming in. So that is why whenever we talk about the foreign policy, because it is more related to our country's safety and security, and a definite set of authorities are preset for that. When we talk about the norms, because people are into that particular system, they know about the norms, when to say, what to say, where to say. And it's when, of course, this is very much different from a general public policy whenever we talk about the foreign public policy. Because usually in public policies, the general public policies, there are certain various norms. But if we talk about the foreign policy, there are very few norms which is to be adhered. A limited time span, because yes, of course, whenever we talk about the foreign policy, it is for a limited time span because we are talking about any of the eventuality which is going to happen or which already had occurred action. And for taking the actions on those things, taking the actions on those accounts, that is why the foreign policy is working. Basically, it's been, whenever we talk about the foreign policy, usually in other policies, we take the notion of keeping forward or foresight for the 10 years or 5 years. But in foreign policy, we are not keeping the foresight of 5 years or 10 years because we need to think as per the scenario of the global people of global countries, what they are actually taking the actions on that. And that is why the frequency is not, it's very much dependent upon the other countries, I must say. More in frequency because policy change in their foreign policy as per the need of the other countries or as per the actions of the other countries, I must say. Please move on to the next one. I will let you know why I am taking about here the foreign policy more. This we have covered even in our design thinking also. This we have covered in our previous presentations also, how you people were presenting the Indian space policy or drone flying policy. That is, you need to define the alternatives, narrow down all the alternatives, and then relate all those policy formulations, cost to benefit alternatives. If I am taking up this particular infrastructure or I am taking up this particular resource, how much cost to the benefit of that particular infrastructure is or that particular resources that you need to always and always keep on doing when you are formulating any of the public policy. What is the skill set required for this particular policy formulation is you have to be a very expansive thinker on that. A wide spectrum thought should be there. A more larger vision should be there for that whenever you go for any policy formulation. Please move on to the next one. Once we come up for the policy decision making, uh, here, of course, the segmentation is more or less it is symbolic as per the policy uh, framework, but of course, the characteristic defines that optimum ways to achieve. We if I take the notion of that MBO, management by objectives, so where you are setting up some of the goals for that particular team people or for that particular actions and opting out single options on those particular steps which we need to take on, and then we have to go for this particular policy decision making. And what we require for that particular skill set is we have to release order to subsidiaries to perform. That is what just lay down the formal steps or the guidelines to action upon and present it to the people those who are actually on the implementation board. You need to please lay down all the orders for that, and people around implementation they will be working on that. Please move on to the next one. Once we talk about the policy implementation, it's always a chaotic actually once we talk about the policy implementation, because whenever we talk about the policy implementation, usually all policy fails in regard to policy implementation, and that is why the critics were talking about that it is a bookies, either the bookies or they were talking about that they are not taking the ground realities whenever they are actually looking out for the action on this. So once we are actually in the policy for implementation characteristic, we need to think for how and by whom to do actually for those things. Who all people will be working on that? What are the resources required? What is exactly the budget is required? What is the unit allocation for each of that particular action? Action here means either of the group of the people or for the particular action. What are the particular budget it is required for? Then comes how micro level requirements can be desired and how we can take up the decisions so quickly and so fastly for that micro level requirements. So we need to take on the decisions on those micro level requirements too. Of course, this macro level requirements and decision making on micro levels, they keep on changing. And it's a very unique process for each day, even for the each week, it has been changing this particular micro level thinking and micro level decision making. And what all the skill sets required for that, you have to be very much process oriented. What exactly you are going to do, what all the set process for that, who all are working on those, what all the resources will be coming on. So a real-time knowledge is required on that. For each of the resource, for all of the resources, I must say. And micro level decision maker has to be there, and group dynamics is to be there, because when we talk about the implementation part of any of the policy, there are many group members, those who are actually working on that. And if you are good in that, if you are good in group thinking, if you are good in group dynamics, you can be the leader on that implementing any of the policy. Please move on to the next one. So, public policy making, decision making. So I've narrated what all those steps were there and what all the skill set was required for that. Usually, when we talk about the decision-making forms, okay, public policy decision-making have a two opposite equal functional and constructive opinions. Always it is there when we talk about the decision-making. But decision-making are having a forms too. There are preset of those particular forms. That is what group thinking is, where so much cohesion is there that so many people are there and giving you the guidance on that for each of the subject for taking the decision making. Then comes the polythinking. A completed fragmented system are there. We are actually fragmenting each of the segmentation on that, and then all those segmented people and all those segmented groups are actually coming up with their suggestions on that. And then comes the convergence and divergence. That is what the double diamond theory of design making was. First, you have to convert your thought. First, you have to convert your thought process, your outgoing steps for that, and then you have to diverge for the incoming steps, and then you have to come up with a decision making. So these are the three subsets for decision making forms. That is group thinking, polythinking, and quantile. Please move on to the next one. If we take about the decision making characteristic, either group thinking, polythinking, and quantile, what are the characteristics of that? If you see group thinking. Of course, group here means so many people will be working on that. There will be a completely cohesion in this particular system. But still, if I talk about the group of the people, more or less, people are very much self-centered in their, of course, behavior, in their thought, and they are always self-censoring each of the segmenters. They never actually try to re-examine for any of the rejected or any of the options which has been present with you. So when we talk about the group thinking, these are, of course, are you can say demerits for coming up for the decision making. The challenging part of this particular decision making, whenever we go for within group thinking, is people are self-centered, people are self-centered. They do not go for a re-examining of any of the options which has been rejected by any of the people. Selected and they are very much biased, and usually group thinking people fail to actually follow any of the contingency plans. They usually don't go with the contingency plans, or even there are certain instances that they don't go for any, even the contingency plans. They are very much low in problem solving. That is what the characteristic of group thinking, because so many people are there, so many people are thinking on that. So the resolution is not coming up in a better shape. If I take off the completely fragmented, that is polythinking, of course, there will be a plural opinion on that. There will be a conflict into that. But one thing is there. They serves to no result, of course. Why? Because they are fighting. But the major factor or the major demerit of this polythinking is whatever is being discussed among us, whatever being discussed between the people, although they are fragmented, they are highly, of course, having the powers on this regulations, legislation, and two. But due to their inter-conflicts among the groups, they actually go for a leakage of the information towards other sources like media and press media and like so. So polythinking is, of course, better way because so many people, segmented people are coming up with their decisions or with their solutions. But some of the conflicts are always there, and that will be there again and again and again. And when I see the quantity, a quantity is a very balanced approach. You might be have worked on that, how during a design thinking process, you are actually thinking for all the balanced and equilibrium was there in your decision making. You were going conversion once you were thinking for all those options. Then you were actually diverging towards our narrow line towards one of the options. And that is what the suboptimal options are coming in when we talk about the quantity. So these are the three of the steps or three of the decision-making characteristics, and their merits or the demerits, I must say, this is been reflected to you. Please move on to the next one. So based on these particular challenges or based on this particular decision-making system, here I have narrated one of the story. Of course, it's been not clear to you. Let me narrate you the story what exactly the case study is. Once I will present this particular presentation to you, you will come to know. The case study is of the US Army, actually, the boardroom of the US Army, where Mr. Obama was discussing on one of the very serious matter of ISIS. The discussion was going through the boardroom of defense, how to actually tackle ISIS, where in Syria. The problem set was to go and help out. Either they have the two options. They were having the two options, either to go with the Kurdish people. That is what YPG is actually working there. And let us support Kurdish people to go for it and fight for US actually, US Army. Or the second option was to actually help out or reach out towards the Turkish troops. They can actually very well, they were in connect of both. Either you talk about the Kurdish troops, that is YPG, or in connect of Turkish troops. They were very well connected to those. But there was some of the discussions which are coming up that what can be the best method to come in. And during this particular discussion, that why? Because I have taken this particular case study, because if you go through this particular case study, they were actually using all these three segments. That is what quantitative, group thinking and polythinking. In the end, of course, when they come up with a decision, when they have come up that, okay, we will be helping out for this and giving a memo to Turkish that we are going to do this, and these are the preset requirements that you need to do. But once they come out with this particular decision to actually help it out to the Kurdish people, using the polythinking or quantum method or the group thinking method, they have applied each and everything actually into this. But what they got in regard to this is, because they were into group thinking, no decision was coming up. At last, the Secretariat of Defense, he only himself have come up. There is no such decision. Last 2 months, we are actually deciding on this, and we are not able to decide on. And we will not keep on going with this thing, a group thinking process. No need to go for a group thinking process. The major demerit of that polythinking process was, in one of the instances, their defense secretary, not the topmost, but one of the just down to the topmost defense secretary, he actually resigned. And this particular news comes out of the boardroom towards the media people. And that is what the demerit of polythinking. And due to, of course, Conti, they have come up with some these of the resolutions that either we can go up with the Kurdish people or we can go up with the Turkish people. But again, at the end of the discussion and at the end of the decision, the polythinking wins in, because polythinking was actually the process which has given the notion or which has given the option that we need to go with the Kurdish and we need to give a memo to the Turkish people that we are going to do this. Akshay, if you can go to the last slide of this and just zoom it out, the conclusion part. I have narrated you the story, but there is a conclusion in that, and if you see the conclusion, okay. See, in conclusion, they have written in the Raqqa offensive example, we illustrated group decision making. I have actually taken one of the article written by one of the public policy professionals on this particular thing. So in Raqqa, an offensive example, we have illustrated group thinking, group decision making dynamics in the context of public policy cycle or stages. That is what we have narrated also. And we demonstrated how dominant group dynamism in this particular foreign policy decision making is. Process shifted throughout the stages of the policy cycle. The more successful group dynamics of Condi was dominant during the policy formulation. However, this quickly shifted to the suboptimal group dynamics of group thinking at the decision making stages. But sooner that particular news goes out, the resignation of their defense person, they have actually cut down that group thinking will not be there as a decision-making process. Finally, the polythinking dynamics dominated the stage of implementation when tactical questions required action. A single illustration has a little empirical external validity, but the example should encourage scholars. However, this quickly shifted to the suboptimal group dynamics of group thinking at the decision-making stage. Finally, the polythinking dynamics dominated the stage of implementation when tactical questions required action. A required illustration has little empirical external validity, but the example should encourage scholars to connect the field of public policy and foreign policy decision-making and continues to test the assertion presented in the article. This particular article has given the note that, okay, once we are going for a decision making, how to go for that particular decision making, whether it's been best to go for a conduit or whether it's been best to go for a polythinking. Usually in group thinking, there were so many diversions going on. There were so many people coming up for each of the day. But there was no such results coming in. For you can say 2 months or so, they have actually working on the decision of this particular problem set. And you can very well check in how the foreign policy is actually thinking in a different sort of way, like of any general public policies. So that is what actually I have taken on the decision-making process for today's session. Thank you to all. If anyone is having any of the questions, please let me know in regard to polythinking, divergent, or this other ways. If I have any questions, please let me know. Or you can switch on your, I think, videos so that our editing can have pics, because we are ending up the session for the day. Thank you to all. Thank you to honorable speaker, sir, Dr. Anil Kumar, sir, who was there with us, enlightening us on the ODCP. And I have covered two of the schemes. That is one of the scheme, that is Aadhaar card scheme, and secondly, today's on the public policy, what decision making is, how actually it is helping out, what can be the forms of decision making, and one of the case study on US Army, how they were actually looking out using those polythinking or quantitative thing. Students, you need to actually today present your this thing, assignment 4, that is on. I think Sitali, you might be, yeah, you are looking for something, or would you like to say something? Okay.
No, sir, just looking forward for the submissions today.
Yeah. Students, today you need to submit your assignment 4, that is for design thinking. And yes, I have given the email ID and what all the parameters, how we are going to evaluate you people. That is also been said to all the mentors also, all the evaluators also, and all the even college coordinators and students too, so that they can prepare. You have a time up to night 12 o'clock. So it depends upon you. I think UPS have presented this thing to us by mail, just within the time frame of our this thing. Today's session they have presented. So UPS he has presented, left out with NMITD, and lastly with Avinash Tingam. So thank you to all. I request all to please switch on your this thing video. I can see only 3 or 4 faces here. So Akshay, you can take this thing, fix the Kodak movement for all.
Okay, sir.
Okay, might be it's a problematic for all of you, because on Sundays you people are enjoying. I can see very less. Okay, some of RM has actually switched on, has switched on. Okay, thanks for being with us. We have completed our 5th weekend. That is, now we are left out with one of the last weekend, and then we are actually going on for a team event tournament that will be there for 3 to 4 days. On the initial day, there will be a quiz round. 100 questions will be there out of our presentations, and all will be in teams, and all will be in different teams. So, but UPS and Avinash Tingam, because you are more in numbers, so you have a better edge to win those that particular team maybe. But I do agree, if NMITD comes up with 12 of the teams, or they are coming up with 6 teams, this we need to decide on. But those students, those who are having a more numbers, or those institutions, those who are having a more numbers, they have a better chance to actually win on that team maybe. All the presentations, you need to go through it, because by each of the presentations there will be 1 to 2 questions on the quiz round, and we have actually 23 teams in that. And what I am formulating is, out of these 23 teams, there will be somewhere around 20 teams will be there, those who are going to present. And each of the team, 5 teams will be there in the particular presentation. We will be giving 4 of the public policy topics to you. And for each day, or even for 1 day or 2 days, there will be presentation for each of the topics. 5 teams will be presenting one of the topic. Other 5 teams will be presenting the second topic. Third team will be presenting the third topic, and fourth team will be presenting the fourth topic. Likewise, you will be getting the top 2 teams, and with the top teams, they will be going for fighting for the team evening tournament. That is what the final day. So this is what the structure of team evening tournament going to be. I must say, last weekend will be the fine for you, but team evening will not be the fine for you. So go on, keep on actually reading up all your assignments or all the presentations which is being shared by you, or even if you go with the videos, need not to think more of that. Just go through the videos. All those videos, all the talks were there in the videos. So if you go through the videos, you can very well actually, that will go in more actually, I must say. Because reading up the books and reading up the presentation never helps out. But if you listen out, that helps more. So just listen out all the videos and you will be getting all those questions on the quiz form. That will help you more. Thanks. Nothing. I'm not taking much of your time. Thank you to all. Enjoy your weekend, and we will be having soon the next weekend and next sessions too. Thank you. I'm ending up the session today. Thanks, Akshaya, and thanks to all, and thanks to our honorable speaker also. Thank you.
All the
Thank you,
best.
sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.